Hey everyone, Tom and Dan here to talk about Bone Frog Coffee. Tim Cruikshank is a retired U.S. Navy SEAL who's defended this nation around the world during the most dangerous of times. When Tim retired after 25 years, he wanted to give back to the very community he served. So Tim founded and developed Bone Frog Coffee Company for the specific reason to assist the naval special warfare community and the families of Navy SEALs by giving back 10% of all the proceeds that Bone Frog Coffee brings in.
During my day, and especially when we do the show, I drink Bone Frog coffee. It's all that I drink. I really love the Zen Frog decaf. Bone Frog has incredible sample packs, the perfect way to try all the amazing Bone Frog blends. Sample packs are 4-ounce samples of all 6 blends. And when you use our exclusive promo code Gold Shields, you get an additional 10% off individual orders and 15% off a subscription order. They have an iconic roaster, Dave Stewart, who has for 50 years developed a mastership of roasting, and he helps create their blends. He mentors and he roasts coffee for Bone Frog. They source their beans from the best fields in the world of Central and South America.
So make sure you go to bonefrogcoffee.com/goldshields and use our promo code goldshields. Look for their new blend, red, white, and brew, their sample packs. You can order whole beans or ground, whichever you like, and K cups. Make sure you get 4 bags for the entire month of coffees for one flat shipping rate. And not to mention their incredible merchandise of t shirts, polos, coffee mugs, shot glasses, and their great hats.
So go right now to bonefrogcoffee.com/goldshields and get 10% off your first order and also 15% off your Bone Frog Coffee subscription. Just enter Gold Shields at checkout. That's bonefrogcoffee.com/goldshields. Hey, and welcome back to Gold Shields. I'm Dan Murphy, along with my partner in crime, Tom Smith. And this week we have amazing guests. We are proud to have with us the hosts of the incredibly popular LA Not So Confidential forensic psychologists, Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott. Welcome to Gold Shields.
Thank you, guys. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, we're very excited. Oh, thank you. We're very excited to have you guys. Your podcast is amazing, but just as much amazing is the work that you do. You're both forensic psychologists, and I think there's been an increased interest with the whole interest in true crime, etc. But people really want to understand the criminal mind, and that's what you guys are experts in. So we want to delve into that today, right, Tom?
Yeah, we've done so many shows on the law enforcement side and what goes into the dedicated work of detectives and agents and prosecutors and the military, but we've never kind of done it the other way. Why criminals do what they do and what goes through the criminal mind when those cases are going on. And you know what? You two are such a privilege to have on because detectives and who have to rely on you know there's talented people out there that do this work and they have to rely on it. Danny and I say it all the time when it comes to big cases: put your ego in a drawer and let people who actually know what they're doing do it and don't interfere. And you guys are that. So we're really happy and psyched that you're here today to get the whole other side of crime
Yeah, absolutely.
out
And I
there
think the
on
thread
our
through
show.
all
So
of your
thank you.
guests is it's looking at the population that keeps us all employed, right?
Mm. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. I want to jump on something that you said, Tom, that I think is just so incredibly important is, you know, uh, get all the training you can in whatever you do. Get all the training, get all the education, continue to educate yourself, read everything, and then also remain curious. And that's one of the things that, I mean, as we get into your episode today, it's one of the kind of recurring themes for Dr. Shiloh and I, because we're active in the training community and we go to conferences. We call ourselves training whores, but you run into people that, get a couple of letters after their name and they start sort of spinning out, like not just my discipline either, but like it's just so important. Be curious, open to the possibility that you might learn something, or you might learn something new, or you might have to change your perspective on something. It's just so valuable because we run into people that are kind of have been fixed in the same place for a decade, and you just like, oh, what am I going to do with that? How am I going to consult with this person?
Right. So, real quick on your backgrounds, not real quick, take your time, of course. Tell us about how you got to be where you are, doing what you do, what
Sure.
drove you.
Well, I came into this world soaked
Shiloh
in
first,
police
if you don't
culture.
mind.
I was born to a mom, a dad, and a few years later, a stepfather who were all LA County Sheriff's deputies. So that's what my household was like. But honestly, I think a lot of times kids want to do something above and beyond what their parents do. And I think parents wish that for their children. And I was very interested in criminal justice. And as I found out later on, kind of the psychology behind it, but I didn't really want to be a street cop. And I kind of had my sights set on what I thought eventually when I got into college and started studying criminal justice and psychology was the California Department of Justice seemed like the perfect fit for me. So I kind of had my eyes on just going straight into there as a special agent after graduating. And at the time I was in undergrad, I was a police cadet at my local police department and just kind of seeing behind the scenes, seeing what it was like, but also thinking like, okay, I do want to do something else. Well, I mean, my plans were foiled, which for the best, because trust me, it has all worked out and brought me to where I'm at today. But the state of California, when I graduated, was on this hiring freeze that lasted probably longer than a year. So I really thought, okay, I'm just going to set my sights on federal law enforcement then. But I couldn't just do that with a bachelor's degree. I needed some sort of experience. So by that time, I went to my captain, who was amazing, and said, look, I'm thinking about putting in for police officer. Would you guys hire me? But also trying to be transparent that I probably wasn't going to be there forever. And he was so wonderful and such an advocate for recruiting more female officers and quality female officers that he was like, absolutely. But, we're going to invest in you. So just give me like 4 or 5 good years. And I was eternally grateful and ended up going to the Sheriff's Academy and then working for the police department here in a small city in Southern California. So, about a year into that, I decided to get the wild idea to go back to school and get my doctorate in forensic psychology. I just thought, one, I absolutely love school, but two, I thought this will make me a better candidate for whatever is next for me. And got into that program, absolutely loved everything about it, but I was still in the mindset of I'm not going to be a licensed psychologist. I'm going to be a law enforcement officer still. And then I started doing some internships and I started working with offenders. And for me, it was just, hey, I want to be a fly on the wall and hear what these guys have to say. My first internship was with the parole department, working with high risk sex offenders. And it was endlessly fascinating. And eventually, my final internship, which was full time, so I had to take a year leave of absence from the PD to do this internship, was doing that same type of work. And that's where Dr. Scott and I met. So here we were, two totally different people coming into this internship together, and we were fast best friends since then. But towards the end of my internship, I was processing with the FBI and they gave me a conditional job offer. And then our internship said, we like what you're doing. We'd love to hire you as a psychologist after you graduate. And I was kind of stuck here at a crossroads of two really good things, but had to make some hard decisions because I had this one thing that was kind of my dream forever. And then this new thing, which was really, really fulfilling to me. And ultimately, I decided I did not want to do another academy. I did not want the FBI to send me to Anchorage, Alaska, or wherever they could. And, made the best decision for my family to stay and continue my road to becoming a licensed psychologist and working in forensic psychology. So I did that work for a little over a decade full time. And then about 6 years ago, I completely pivoted and changed. And now I'm a police psychologist with a large law enforcement agency out here, working with police department employees as my clients, supporting them in services, and a few other things that we can talk about as we get into it. And I married a cop. And my brother's a cop.
That's
So,
awesome.
Incredible.
wife, daughter, sister. I said I'd never marry a
Of
cop
course you
either.
did.
And he just ruined it all for me. And 20 years later, here we are. I know.
We
You do
tend to
know-
ruin. We tend to ruin things.
Oh yeah, I was going to say
100%.
you do know that
Yes.
it's a diagnosable mental health issue that you want to hang around cops. Yeah. Dr. Scott, your background, please, sir.
Yeah, hold on, let me not do that to my microphone. Excuse me. Yeah, my path's a little bit different. I'm a Southern California transplant, like so many people out here. I grew up in Northern Alabama. Had if you would have talked to me even 25 years ago that I would be doing this, I would have had no clue because I was firmly situated in entertainment for many years. Grew up the child of an educator and a small business operator. And yeah, I worked in entertainment out here for close to 2 decades and had a great run, had a really, really great run in entertainment. We have a saying out here, though, that um, entertainment is a harsh mistress, which I think is a little bit sexist. So I'll say is entertainment is a harsh affair. I'll say that because it's really great when it's great. I mean, like, you meet the most unbelievably talented and amazing and smart people. But it's a gig economy for so many people, despite the fact that I was a member of several unions. And as I transitioned through different parts of entertainment, my last gig was like a dream job. And I had no idea that I would enjoy doing post-production work for content. And then one of my bosses took me aside and said, "Hey, you're really good at this. You fell into this. You helped us get through this production. You need to know that all this is going away. All of this fun stuff is actually going to be going away. And I can teach you to do what you're doing um, at the next level, and you'll always be marketable. But this level of fun work and the amount of money that we made from this is all going away." And he gave me something. I mean, it was the most valuable, trusted advice I could get because it came at a time where I was figuring out, like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I really need a retirement plan. I need a pension. I need solid health insurance. And my therapist had been pushing me. He said, "I think you should consider coming into this world." And I was like, no, I don't want to listen to people talk all day. I can't stand myself talking all day. And he talked about it some more. He was very, very convincing. And then I thought, okay, I'll go dip my toe into a master's program, which is, at the master's level, you have some opportunities, but it's mainly geared towards people going into private practice. And I mean, the minute I went back to school, it was like I could just feel synapses crackling in my head. It was fantastic. I mean, it was like, this is amazing information. I want more. I want more. Signed up, started the program, continued to work full time at the job that was really supportive of me throughout the whole process. And then I got about 3/4 of the way through the master's program, and I realized, like, I want more. I want more. I want more job opportunities. I want more education. I want more training. And also, I found out at this time, at solidly in midlife, that I had been struggling my entire life with ADHD and never known it. My learning style was completely different. There were things that came incredibly easy to me my entire life, like intellectually, cognitively, behaviorally, and there were others that were just like hitting your head against a cinder block over and over again. And I would go like, why can't I get this? I literally can't get this. And, I would do workarounds as most people with ADHD do. But to find that out at midlife and then be able to engage in uh, behavioral changes, lifestyle changes that helped address that, kind of like I felt like I leveled up. If you're for the gamers in the room that are listening, is like I really leveled up in that moment. And then I got into a doctoral program that just made me realize, like, oh, I have a real capacity for this. Like, I have a real capacity for understanding these concepts. And I'm I mean, I probably sound very bombastic to a lot of our listeners, but you know, I come from real deep Southern roots. That is the core value of Southern culture is don't get too big for your britches. So it's not very often that I pat myself on the back, but I found through this education something that I'm really, really good at. And then I had no idea what forensics were until the doctoral program was like, oh, we offer an emphasis in family forensics. So I got training in expert witness, legal procedures, intersection of criminality, intersection of family evaluation for custody, you know, all sorts of things that I was like, what the hell? I never even knew I was interested in doing this. This is a thing. So then I met Shiloh uh, by accident. Like I was like, well, let me see if I can find a forensic site. Found this forensic site. And it's so funny because having been a performer back in the day, like I can give a good interview. It's like very few times in my life that I have not gotten an offer on a job I've been interviewed for. And like, if you can't dazzle them with your brilliance, you baffle them with your bullshit. And I'm telling you, the woman that ran this clinic is a no bullshit woman. Like she is one of the tightest, smartest, best supervisors still to this day that I've ever had. Really great mentor. And she was a complete blank slate. Like when you're interviewing with her, I walked out of there, was
They
like,
hate
I have
me.
no freaking clue how I did. Like, there's just no chance I got this job.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, there was like, they hate me. But I got the offer, and Shiloh and I ended up sitting back to back in a tiny little office. I remember one of the first things she said is she's like, I'm going to pick, because I was like, well, where do you want to sit? I'm flexible. And she goes, I'm going to challenge myself to sit with my
He's
back to
like,
the
what the
door.
hell do you even
I was
mean?
like, what? And we had this long conversation. So
Yeah.
then her history,
Oh,
right.
we know what
And
you
her
mean.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
you
Yeah.
completely get it,
Yeah.
right? It was like an alien concept to me. So we start talking about it, and then she gets and then like I think I cut some really disgusting joke that was really completely inappropriate. And immediately, like her
We got
snort
each
at
other.
that is like we just knew we were friends. We're just like okay, we got
Oh,
this.
that's
We
great.
totally got this. So yeah, I I was in a little bit of a different position. Like I had leveraged what savings and monies I had to get to that point. And my husband is a production designer for feature films, but it was that time was really difficult in the industry. So we were both kind of probably at one of the most challenging points financially. And I was like, I have to get a guaranteed job. And the guaranteed jobs were prisons. So I took a job with California Department of Corrections, and it was mind-blowingly great experience. Very challenging, but great experience. Was there for 3 years, then worked in the largest jail in the country, and then now I work for one of the largest mental health organizations in the world. But my role is I pair with detectives and officers in order to uh, address when the severely and chronically mentally ill in the community come in contact with law enforcement. So I do a lot of court advocacy. I work towards conservatorships. I do evaluations. I do consultations to a lot of times I'll be working with the psychiatrists that are at the inpatient facilities to say, hey, I just need you to know you're only getting one very small part of the story of this individual. I need to give you the entire mental health and developmental history that the family hasn't given you so that you understand, you know, we can collaborate on a discharge plan. But that's just literally the tip of the iceberg for the job I do. And then what's amazing is that, you know, 6 years ago, I was convinced, I was like, Shiloh, you got to be a law enforcement officer. Because I had been a law enforcement psychologist for a brief time with a law enforcement agency, but there was another large agency was opening up. And I was like, Shiloh, you're perfect for this. They're going to love you. You got to do it. And Shiloh, she
Well, when
doesn't
I
say
was
it much,
going
but
through my
she hemmed and
program,
hawed like,
everyone
I
in
don't
my
know, maybe, I
class was
don't
like,
know.
aren't you going to be a police psychologist because you're a police officer? And I was like, fuck no, I don't want to work with those people. Like I work with them all the time right now. So I needed I needed 10 years away,
I live
to
with them.
decide to do something different. And
Yeah.
honestly, like it was time to work with the good guys. It was time to do
Regroup.
something different. And it's been the best like full circle experience I could ever ask for. Most meaningful work.
Yeah. And she downplayed a little bit of what she was doing. For that 10 years working with sex offenders, she was dealing with like the most challenging cases that exist out there, that the community should really know and be grateful that there are organizations like this that track these perpetrators in the community. Yeah.
Now, Shiloh, how
7
long were
years,
you
and I
on
worked
the street?
patrol
How long
almost
were
the
you a
entire
police
time
officer?
because I was going to school or I was working weekend nights, working a 312, and then going to school during the week. So I did a little stint as a background investigator after one of my officer-involved shootings while I was out, and then I was the terrorism liaison officer, but that was just ancillary to what I was doing.
Right. And the reason I ask that
What?
is because, listen, cops are cynical. All right, we are, and
No.
yeah,
Really?
believe it or not. So, and what I mean by that is when another entity comes into your case, wherever it is, it's always, well, you're not a cop. Oh, you've never done it. How do you know what's going on? You have that ability to go, no, moron. I've done it. I've been there. My whole family is this. And to bring that perspective and that
Right.
legitimacy to what you do, not that you have to legitimize, but you know what I mean, to throw that at them, go, no, I know exactly what's going on here. And then you start your thing, I think is such a tremendous tool that you have to bring to
Yeah,
what
well,
you
thank you for
do
saying that because I
involved in a
I
case.
really didn't want to put that as the first thing forward. And when I came into the work that I'm doing now, so for my unit, I'm the first psychologist to work there that has had law enforcement experience. We've had some military vets that have been psychologists there, um, but I didn't want to make it a thing, and especially clinically, right? It's about the client. It's not about me, but almost exactly what you said. I remember the first time I did a training, and when I got there, we got thrown into this training. We were training the entire department on wellness and the most common ways that officers lose their lives. And of course, a piece of that was going to be suicide awareness and prevention. So, I mean, we were training 300 cops a day or a session. And I remember in one of these sessions, for whatever reason, I felt like a little piece of my story was relevant and I talked about it. And this old salty guy came up to me afterwards and he's like, Doc, I I was not listening to you until you said that. And then my ears perked up. I tuned right in. And it was like I could take in the information that you were giving. And I just thought that was so powerful that strategically I do use it. And now a lot of people, I get clients that are like, hey, so and so said I should come see you because you used to be a cop. Like it's just word of mouth at this point. But yeah, I mean, it's incredibly helpful. And I've been on the other side of it. Like I said, I've had 2 officer involved shootings. I had to go see the psychologist afterwards. And honestly, one of them was a great experience and one was a horrific experience. And I never want an officer to have that again.
Wow. We tip our hats to you for what you both do. Working alongside and working with cops cannot be easy for anybody, even for other cops. It's a cloistered community. They listen to what they want to listen to and who they want to listen to. But there's one thing I can tell you from my experience that really does work, and that's persistence and success. When you can show them value to what you're doing, they will eventually listen. Even the most hardcore, staunch, like cop only mentality, which I hate to say it, it does exist. You'd like to think we can be more open minded and accept, but I've seen it in other areas, whether it be, medical legal examiners at crime scenes, they prove themselves. You're not a cop, you're not really a doctor. Who are you? Well, I happen to know a lot about death, and I'm here to help you with your investigation. But I really applaud what you're doing. I cops tend to we categorize things in simplest terms because sometimes just from sheer volume, it's easiest to do. Like, for example, on the radio, you get a call, it's an EDP.
Okay.
We used to call them NYPD,
Yep.
believe it or not, used to call them psychos. Get a call for a psycho. And then by the time I came on, it was an emotionally disturbed person. And you get there, and all you know is this person is acting out or is just suicidal, something you don't really know the drivers, you don't understand the mentality. And oftentimes we have to deal with that person with very little understanding of how to deal with that person. And that's where I think your work is so critical to educating law enforcement. There's a reason why this guy's doing that. And this is what his need is at the moment. Or this behavior is typical of somebody who is A, B, or C, and this seems to work with them. And maybe I'm not trying to overly simplify it. What I'm trying to say is, if I could say anything to the members of law enforcement listening to this, be open to learning more about the human being and the human brain, because you're dealing with it every day, and you can make a lot of mistakes if you don't understand it. And I'm sure I did in my career. And so I really applaud what the both of you are doing. And Dr. Scott, what you do working alongside cops and detectives on cases is fascinating. Understanding the criminal mind, why they do what they do, their motivations, their tendencies, given what's going on with them. I'm sure see things a lot different than the average cop or detective, and we need that perspective to do our job better. We absolutely need it to serve the community better.
Well, there's a wonderful thing that's happening, in law enforcement culture, which is something that mental health workers have really been striving for about 2 decades, and that's the destigmatization of mental illness, because mental illness, emotional challenges hit every single part of our population. You are not getting out of this life without some aspect of that hitting you. And one of the great opportunities I've had in my current position, I got voluntold, when I came on about 7 years ago, to conduct a 2 to 3 hour lecture and educational units for mental health intervention training. And at the time, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, my agency was the gold standard across the US for mental health intervention training. And I can gladly say now that it lit a fire across the country, and everybody, more and more agencies are doing this or using even online resources if they can't have a dedicated educational model or module. But when I started doing my lectures, and I would do an overview, like a 2 to 3 hour overview of, like, this is what you're going to be immersed in this week. Here's our goal. Here are our aspirations for this week. And at the end of the week, we're gonna sit you into situation simulations with professional actors, and we're gonna really push you to use these skills that you've built. But the opening introduction to that module that that I would start, and the entire program is run by officers and detectives who are so skilled, um, is we would go around the room asking people, what's your experience with mental illness? Family members experience. And 7 years ago, nobody would say anything. It would be a bunch of grizzled, mainly older guys towards the end of their career, sitting all pushed against the back of the room with their arms crossed, and nobody said a damn thing. And, I'd share my own family history of mental illness. The other officers who ran the program would share it as well. And then, you would see lights come on at the end. Like, the officers, because the program is so good, they would really get a lot of it. But what's really cool is that 7 years later, the younger, um, people coming in, the recruits, the new police, they get it. And they'll be like, "Yeah, my sister has schizophrenia. It's like, it's really challenging in my family. Yeah, my best friend and my buddy all through academy that I was shoulder to shoulder with for 10 years killed himself, and none of us knew this was coming." But so the idea that we've cracked open this conversation is so important. It's just so important within law enforcement, because we all know what happens to the majority of the guys who make it to retirement date. Like, if they don't have a retirement plan, like a plan for their life, a purpose, that all of that trash compacted emotion and
Yeah, I
unresolved
love
trauma
that
is going to hit
Scott can
them
be
full
teaching the
force at age
officers
55.
really from the angle of like, hey, we're dealing with a community with, high rates of mental illness here in Los Angeles. And then also, I'm seeing the same thing as a clinical psychologist with officers, where the younger generations are coming in when their problem is really small and not, 15, 20, 25 years big. And they're just addressing it when it's small. they're,
Yep.
generationally, and then being a big metropolitan area, they're like, all my friends come to therapy, like, no big deal, whatever. And they talk about it. I'll be at a Starbucks downtown and I'll see a client and they'll be like, hey, doc. And I'm just like, okay, I guess it's okay if you're acknowledging me in public. So it's really cool. And I think it's going to be a total game changer just because we do have so many generations in the workforce right now, but these younger generations are so open to it that to me it's the ultimate hope for looking at getting the information and the access to support services into police officers. That my prediction is that we'll see suicide rates start to go down in coming generations.
Hope to God. And you know what? I think a lot of that has to do with I think a lot of the acceptance of it is people realizing today that they're not the only ones, and
Yeah.
the conversations that go on between young people and problems that are going on, and even now in law enforcement, like Danny and I talked forever. Back when we first got on the job, you couldn't mention a
Right.
problem you had. You couldn't tell someone you had a bad dream or else you were done. Shield was gone, gun was gone. You
Yep.
were on a desk in Staten Island on
Hmm.
midnights, counting, radio cars in a parking lot. That was going to be your job,
Right.
for the simple fact of just saying, yeah,
Yeah.
I had a couple bad dreams yesterday. Oh my God, lights off, forget it. And now the acceptance of it and how many resources are out there and the resources leading to, like I said, more people realizing they're not alone, that it is a thing and it's okay. And Danny says this all the time. I'm going to steal his line. It's okay to tell people you're not okay. That's a good thing today because of so many people like you and others that are out there for the assistance of military guys and law enforcement. It's
Yeah. And I
such a
think
good
that
outlet, and I'm glad we're getting to that point.
saying you're not okay, either if it's to a peer or a supervisor, or if you just go straight to a mental health professional, it's really important on the mental health professional side to hopefully get someone who's culturally competent to law enforcement. Because we know not to overreact just because you're a cop and you have a gun if you talk about a fleeting thought of suicide, right? We're not going to do anything that's going to get you hospitalized or get your job, taken away from you. We know there's a lot of nuance there, and it needs to take a lot more to, you know, make some very permanent decisions for someone based on just a little bit that they're telling you. Now, a full assessment needs to be done, of course, right? Because we want to put our arms around that person as much as possible and get them the services that they need. But I think if someone goes to a therapist who is not culturally competent in law enforcement and the intricacies of the exposure to trauma and even just what morale is like today, you have someone that actually might overreact because that clinician is scared. Oh my gosh, this person has a gun on their hip all the time, right? So they might go overboard and actually hospitalize this person. So the access to services is key, and however officers feel comfortable doing that, first maybe opening up to a peer support member and then getting pointed in the right direction is a really important path to think about.
Well, to echo what Tom said, and thank you for that, I really, really do hope that it continues on the path it's going on. And part of the reason Tom and I do this show is we really want to help break that stigma as well, introduce our audiences to organizations and professionals who do that, who help cops and help members of law enforcement and the military deal with traumas they've seen in their life. And you don't have to be one of those to have it. Ordinary human beings have traumas too all the time, and it raises its head at some point in your life, like you said, Scott. But when I first became a cop in 1984, the extent of what I learned about psych services, I learned in the locker room, which was you call them, you leave them without your guns, and your career's over. So it's shut down before it starts.
Yeah.
They would have posters in the locker rooms of every precinct that the department put out saying, last year we killed ourselves more than perps did. Like more cops took their lives than were killed in the line of duty. And that's a common every year. That's true. And then by the time I probably had, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7 years in the job, the department was trying They really were trying, but they couldn't break through. One of the things they did, they instituted this thing called CPI, Career Path Intervention, and they would award points for certain traumas or stressful things in your life. And so, as a sergeant, I would see CPI numbers for people, and some of them were off the charts. Like, let's say, for example, if you were a Vietnam veteran, had been in a shooting, had been divorced, had been to what they call the farm, which means rehab for drinking, had been suspended. I mean, and there were people that had multiple of these, and they were still out in the street. These are
Yeah,
these are walking
that's a
wounded
real
people.
like as you were saying that, I was just like, oh,
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's really rough.
And I
Yeah.
knew people that fell into all those categories, and the department let them out there. And at some point, they would say, "Okay, you hit enough number, we'll bring you in." Now they bring you in, and you sit down with psych services, and you're a
Fine.
veteran, experienced cop. And what do you tell them? Nothing. I'm fine. And you go home. Now I knew 7 people very well during my career, and then immediately after, who killed themselves. And I can't say that I would have seen any. I wasn't looking for the signs necessarily, but we need to stop this. We need to stop the whole "mum is the word" nonsense. And the departments have to realize it should not be punitive. And in the NYPD, it was always viewed as punitive. And
Gosh, it's such a
that's
stark
why I'm
picture that
glad
you
that
paint
you guys
there
are doing
where
what you do
literally
about
the
this.
poster is on the wall behind you saying, here's how serious it is, yet you have someone telling you, don't seek help, right? Wow.
Well, look, let's also, it's not it's also not just the officer. It's also law enforcement psychology, and there's only really still a handful in the US. I mean, relative to the other numbers and disciplines within the field of psychology. It has evolved substantially over the past, I would say, even 15 years. Like in the last 15 years, we've seen like incredible movement forward where it's more research based. It's really gotten there's more stats that back up what's actually happening. And so part of it was cops not talking, and part of it is if cops aren't talking, then the psychs that are there for them, what are they working with? They're kind of like flying blind in a way. But then they also, and I'm gonna not name the agencies that are here in Southern California, but there was a notorious public agency that, look, our workers are out there on the front lines and they need services. So they hire like a handful of these really great psychologists that are willing to go into this high acuity situation. And then the higher ups of that agency come in and go, well, what did she tell you? It's like, I'm not going to tell you what she told me. This is confidential information. Oh no, you're going to tell me what she said. I mean, and it's even so that's within like the last 5 years. And thankfully it's not within law enforcement, but related fields. And so we have to keep on the edge of being responsible as professionals as well. All of us, law enforcement, emergency services, mental health, all of us have to have a moral and an ethical compass in doing this work.
Wow,
No
well
doubt.
said.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I want to get to our next kind of uh, subject. I want to either one of you can start this, but let's get into the criminal mind of bad guys, which to me, and Dan and I have had this conversation, fascinates me. The who's, whys, where's, because ofs, whatever. Now, we can go through a series of notorious serial killers or whatever in criminal history, from Son of Sam to David Berkowitz to Charles Manson, Jeffrey Dahmer. What is it that separates them in their actions in your guys' world of either a trigger that happened early in their life that set them on this pace? Is it an immediate thing in their DNA that just gets them in the wrong direction right from Jump Street? How does someone like Jeffrey Dahmer become Jeffrey Dahmer, in the clinical mind? How does that happen? Or is there any
Million dollar
particular
question, Tom.
reason that happens?
It is. I'm going to let Shiloh. I want Shiloh to expand on this, but I did want to say I want to give you a quote that has proved to be so valuable. There's a really fantastic psychiatric social worker in Canada who is sort of like one of the world's experts on school shootings. I mean, this guy, his name is Kevin Cameron. I encourage every law enforcement to go to his website, read the free materials. If your agency can afford to have him come and speak, it is probably one of the best trainings you'll ever get. He has a method called VITRA, violence response threat assessment. And he has a saying that it was really like burned into my brain. The pathway to violence is an evolutionary process. So, we have entire, very successful television shows called Snapped. What was it that just made her snap or made him snap? And it's never about snapping. It's about people reaching their breaking point in any number of factors, and also not realizing that no, we're all so different. We can come from the same kind of um, background, family soup, but you can manifest your characteristics and your personality in so many different ways, and there's so many factors that are involved. So
Well, I
Shiloh
think
has the perfect
to
intro
to
for
pull back and start out big and then
what you're
hone
talking
into
about.
what you're talking about, Tom. We look at criminality, criminogenic minds, the psychology behind that. There's so much research to be done because, yes, we are all fascinated with it, right? As you get into starting to cluster types of behaviors and types of offenses, then you can hone in on those populations with the research, the behavioral research, the psychological research, the biological research. Are we talking about head injuries here? Are we talking about DNA? Are we talking about how this person was raised? A lot of that has been done. But to do that research, you have to have good populations of people that are acting out similarly. So, like Scott is referencing, when we're talking about mass casualty incidents, you guys working in threat assessment, there is a wonderful um, bulk of work being done in that area, and we know a lot. As you hone in on the more rare type of offender, the research gets less and less robust. So, if we are talking about someone like a Jeffrey Dahmer or any other, let's say, serial killer, sexual sadist, serial murderer, we're really talking about a select few of folks where some research has been done, some research has been attempted, and Scott and I, so we have a podcast about forensic psychology. We actually just did an episode on criminal profiling, just looking at what research is out there about criminal profiling. And spoiler alert, it's not great. But the reason, part of the reason for that is because we're talking about people who are so individualized, with such individualized makeups. So it is a mishmash recipe of nature and nurture. But I think, to kind of, after saying that, to step back a little bit, generally, the through thread that we find with these worst of the worst folks is a lot of psychopathy. So, psychopathy, if we kind of just look at that for a moment, is not an actual clinical diagnosis. It is not a disorder that's in our big Bible of disorders, the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. However, there's been a lot of good research done on it. We do have an assessment tool that was developed by Dr. Robert Hare that we can look at the background and behaviors of an individual and then score them on their levels of psychopathic traits. So, traits that we have seen. And just because you're a psychopath, it doesn't mean you're a killer. You can actually be quite functional and put that into other areas that aren't violence. You might not be the most likable person, but you might be a very successful person because you're willing to step on others and you don't have remorse, and you're kind of out for yourself or out for whatever your goal is, and there's no emotionality really attached to that. So you can be a successful politician or leader of a company, and those traits have been channeled in that way. So when we look at psychopathy, the best research that we have right now is that that's really made up of a three-legged stool. Two of those are biological, so it's in the genes and it's in the brain, and then one of those is really that last element of severe childhood trauma. So, an experience in childhood and during development. So that could lead to the folks that we see that act out more violently.
Fascinating, fascinating. And the podcast
Thank
is
you.
LA Not So Confidential. We're okay with naming it on the show.
Oh yeah,
You're not a
thank you.
competitor. You guys are a whole different field. Tom and I together can barely spell our names. You guys are smart. So we welcome our audience to please give it a listen. LA Not So Confidential. You guys both, in addition to having fantastic stories and great guests, you have great personalities, and you're able to dumb it down, so to speak, for the rest of us who aren't doctors. So thank you for that. You know, I think we had a conversation at one point where we talked about a specific investigation individual that I was involved in investigating and assessing, and as I recall, you
That's
wanted to
something I want to
discuss that.
revisit
Is
when we
that
have you
something you
on
wanted to
next
revisit?
week. Can we do that? Okay.
Okay,
And we'll give you the
I'll
audio, and
save
if
that
you want to
story.
release
Yeah.
it to
Okay.
your folks
I'm
at
sorry.
some
I
point,
just
we're
got the
happy
yeah.
to.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
But Tom and I have both dealt with people who we have shook our head, like, "This person's crazy, this person is nuts," and we tend to overly simplify it, and it's very easy in the black and white world sometimes of police work, which you have to sometimes look at it that way, to categorize somebody as just a nut or just a violent, crazed lunatic. When in reality, I think history is showing us that some of the worst serial killers are people that hide in plain sight for 20 years. BTK, people who everyone knows from work and seems like a great guy. John Wayne Gacy, popular in his area, politically involved, knew the mayor. I mean, these are these are people who are far more complex than the axe wielding psychopath running around a neighborhood we see depicted in horror films. So it's possible to have that psychopathy going on. It's possible to have that deviance, that motivating shred of whatever it is that makes you do that and still be
that's the scary
normal
part.
99.99% of your life, or
Well,
at least
present as normal.
present as normal. Thank you.
Yeah, present as normal. Like, because a lot of our world, even if you're not a psychopath, even if you're not a killer, even if you're not a criminal, all of us have a version of what in psychology we would call a mask persona. You have a mask that you present to the world, or when you get into terms of like gender and race, I mean, you can have conversations with people about how they have to code switch in order to function in the world. Like there's a certain way I talk with my family that I would never, use in a business setting, right? So we all have a version of that. And I wanted to like expand just a little bit on what Dr. Shiloh was saying earlier is that, you know, when we look at these sort of what would be the word monumental or really highlighted figures in the current world or historically that have committed these horrible crimes, it is so alien to us that there's an instant fascination, right? And they, in a way, and this is where I get this is where the part of my psychology that's more of a little bit woo woo and Jungian archetypal, which is, I know some big, $4 words or whatever, but, it's about how society views evil, right? Like how we look at if you identify as Christian and how you've been taught to look at the devil, like that's what these figures are to us now. It's like, how could this person do this? How could this person do this? And sometimes, as complex as the personality constellation will be, it really comes down to some very simple factors is they don't think like us. And in some situations, they're not even able to. Like Dr. Shiloh was elaborating on that there's this three-legged stool of these factors, is that we keep going, but why? But why? But why? And the simple answer is because their brains are different, because their wiring is different, and because they were raised in a really, really messed up situation. So, I mean, it's kind of amazing. Actually, I mean, a lot of people don't really take into consideration also just how resilient human beings are. Like we have, people that are raised in horrible, horrible adverse situations all through their childhood and young adult. Exposure to domestic violence, exposure to violence, criminogenic thinking, criminal behaviors, sexual assault, and they end up being incredible quality people who are able to have wonderful lives and raise families going, well, I'm not going to make the mistakes that were made when I was bringing up. And that's how we're wired to survive as a population, right? But when we see these outliers that do these horrible things that are also fed by a 24-hour news cycle, right? Like, it's not like we have more psychopaths statistically than we've ever had. We just have more access to their actions that we see in media.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm gonna go into a small subject that Shiloh and I couldn't wait to talk about on this show. And I'm a big movie guy, and I love lines from movies. And when we were gonna have you on, the very first movie that popped into my head when it comes to something like this was Seven. Okay, and one of my favorite scenes of any movie is the scene in the car with Somerset and Mills and John Doe going to the supposed last two victims. And Mills turns to John Doe and says, I have a question I always wanted to know. When you're insane, as you clearly are, do you know you're insane? Like, do you look in the mirror every day and look and just go,
I love it.
wow,
Was like
it is
watching Brad
amazing
Pitt
how
right now,
insane I
wasn't it?
actually am.
It was
One
like
of my
watching
favorite
Brad Pitt right
lines.
now, Tom.
What was that?
I'm gonna have to watch that later
That's
today.
how many times
It
I've
is.
seen it.
It like just again the terminology insane, and as Dan was saying, like psycho, and then bringing together what Scott was just saying, evil. Right? We put labels on these jars and put people that we don't understand into these jars and put them up on a shelf, and we're just like bad, evil. Okay, like I don't want to think about it anymore. But then there's some of us that are like, no, I want to know everything. Let me open that jar and dig around. Um, and a fantastic movie, one of my top three, absolutely. But that is also that weird nexus of how media starts to influence the way that we think and we are curious about the world. And it's another thing Scott and I love to talk about on our podcast is when things are depicted really well and depicted horribly in movies and TV when we're talking about mental health and certain disorders. Um, but I think media, we can't get away from the fact that media is going to influence us. I think Scott and I aim with our show to sort of ground everybody back into the research and what we really know because we do have the 24-hour media cycle. We do have, we're technically under the genre of true crime, which we felt like fit really well of these big sort of glorifying stories about murder where we could step in and there was a void there where we were like let's just kind of bring people back to reality about what the research says about some of these folks and the why. So it tends to be more clinical, but if you're into that, it's the place to go if you're the person who likes to dig around in the jar to really gain some understanding.
And then that's such a great quote. And boy, I have so many mixed feelings about Kevin Spacey
Yeah.
because, like talk about a complex,
Yeah.
really just, a challenged individual. And I'm going to leave it at that. But he's also, we have to hold these two things that are at the extreme opposites of how we feel about him as a person versus the art he creates. And he's a freaking brilliant actor.
Amazing.
Like literally, I mean, I've seen him misstep once in a movie that was like really bad choice, but he's a brilliant actor. And, you know, as over the top as Seven is, it is a really great example. And especially with that particular question that you asked, does he know that he's insane? But first, just to be clear, insane is a legal term. So in a legal term is like insanity means that you don't understand what you're doing at the time you're doing, or that you don't understand that it's wrong. I mean, there's a whole kind of like competency, ability to understand the legal process. So we use that term interchangeably when it's really just a legal term in today's world. But so let's say, mentally ill. Like, does this guy know that he's mentally ill? Um, he, someone in the position of like, let's just say that this horrific presentation that Seven does is a real person. John Doe falls into the category of a mission oriented serial killer. So he has a higher mission. Everything that he's doing makes sense to him. Even if, like, say there was a level, and clearly has some psychosis going on. Like he's so delusional, his beliefs are so set that he is doing something that's very important to the world, that there's a message that has to be sent. Um, he thinks that he's doing the right thing, despite the fact that it's, killing people across, everything that he's doing is part of a plan and part of a procedure. And that is important to understand, because we have a lot of psychopaths that are presented in different features. Like one of the best ones, the character of Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. That is a really good presentation of a narcissistic sociopath who probably is more delusional, because you're left a little bit at the end of the movie. You don't know if he actually committed any of those crimes, but even if he didn't commit any of those crimes, his internal process clearly shows that he's a person who is on the edge. He has progressed through fantasies and thought crimes, and he may very well be on the edge of committing a crime. So sometimes the movies get it right, but even then it's like, Shiloh and I go, "Oh, but you need to understand more about this particular character. You need to know more." But that's not what entertainment's about.
The other one that actually just popped into my head, which was a great movie and really into what we're talking about, was Basic Instinct with Sharon Stone. That's another one that, I mean, throughout that
Right.
whole movie is it? Is she it? Is it? The back and forth part was I think brilliantly done also.
Yeah, and also, look, and there we need to, in the presentation of criminals, we need to be equanimous about, like, that this is not completely just relegated to men committing these kind of crimes. Is that, there are female psychopaths, there are female criminals, and because of acculturation and gender norms within our society, they take a different path to the commission of their crimes. And I mean, Shiloh and I have talked about this. We were at, was it True Crime Podcast?
Yeah, True
When did
Crime
we do
Podcast
the
Festival 2019.
Mary Kay Letourneau? So yeah, we did Women in Crime crossover live event talking about Mary Kay Letourneau, and how the media had a field day with, like, Hot for Teacher, and they really kind of, if it had, when it is a male perpetrating on a female student, it's very clear how fucked up that is, right? But when the tables are turned, we used to turn a blind eye to it. And it was such a seemingly rare occurrence. And now you see one every week. There's another middle school female teacher who is raping her students. So it's just interesting how these crimes are starting. Maybe again, like I was saying, that we're putting an eye on these things, but it also seems like maybe there's something about our culture currently that is disinhibiting certain types of criminals to certain types of crimes, that they just feel it's okay, I can get away with this. But yeah, I mean, sometimes the
Rapid
media
fire.
really gets it right. What's your next movie? Come on, we'll just name them off,
Go
and
You know,
we'll rapid
go
fire.
I'm
I'll
going
ahead,
to
tell
give
you
Jay.
you
all about those.
I'm going to give you one in the context of had a chance to go to threat assessment school a couple of times and worked on a lot of threat assessment cases, and I've read everything I can read about school shootings, and I've read other books by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman on killing and on combat and stuff like that about the psychology. And one of the things that it seems to be was fairly prevalent inside the rooms or the homes of kids involved in school shooters for a period of time was two movies. One, The Basketball Diaries, which Leo DiCaprio, in an early movie, it shows a school shooting scene in the movie. The second was Natural Born Killers, which came out in the 90s, and it's Woody Harrelson and I think Juliette Lewis, and it is a very tough movie to watch because it is a very obscene image of these two people on a crime spree, and everybody in the movie's messed up.
Yes.
Even Rodney Dangerfield, who plays Julia. I mean, it's they're all messed up, and they're all and violent, and he rapes his own daughter. It's just so hard to watch. But I think it's emblematic of what we have in our society, which is an incredible opportunity on a regular basis for people at a very young age, when their brains are developing, to see realistic depictions of violence on such a regular basis. And Dave Grossman, in one of his books, I think it's on killing, He talks about U.S. soldiers in various wars. He looks at World War One. The percentage of U.S. soldiers in World War One who are able to get themselves to pick up their rifle and fire it at the enemy with the intent to kill was about 16%. The rest of them simply couldn't get themselves to do it. And the war movie depictions are not accurate because that's U.S. Army. He worked for the Army as a psychologist. He taught at West Point, and and then by the time World War II came, they started doing a little bit more realistic training. It wasn't just shooting at targets, and it got up to about 40 something percent. So fully half of the soldiers couldn't get themselves. They weren't they weren't able to overcome the hurdle of viewing the enemy as less than human and taking the enemy out. They hadn't been trained to do that. By the time Vietnam came around and the first Gulf War, we were up in the high 90s. Now, you can attribute that to a lot of things, but the Army had to learn how to get people to overcome that. And I truly believe in my heart, as a non forensic psychologist, that people are not necessarily born, some are, with that desire to kill another human being. In order to create an effective soldier, we have to acclimate that. We have to get them used to the concept and we have to get them comfortable with it, that it's okay. And I think we see a lot of that between violent video games, movies, television. I think we see a lot of that bleeding over. At least that's a theory. How do you guys
Well, I
feel
think,
about that?
just
Do you
going
think
back
that there's
to
anything to say
talking
about
about
that?
the posters, right, in the rooms. I had not heard that in the research I've done on school shootings. Super interesting. But you also have to look at, like, is this a chicken or the egg thing, right? Is this causation? Is this correlation? Are kids who already, we know at the core of any mass casualty offender, the core on that pathway to violence is going to be some sort of grievance, right? So are these kids or perpetrators who had grievances and then were seeking out perhaps entertainment media to validate maybe what they were thinking or what they were feeling, right? So again, sort of chicken or the egg. I'm curious just about that. Um, but over the decades of the research that's been done on looking at violent video games and violent media, that is not a one stop panacea for the idea behind why violence has gotten to where it is, and especially with our young folks. So there, over and over again, a lot of studies, a lot of very good studies are replicated, and it is not confirming the fact that it's a direct causation to acting out behavior.
Well, that's a great answer, and I appreciate that perspective. And I didn't really, maybe I said it wrong. I didn't really want to
Hmm.
suggest that it was,
Okay.
it could
Okay.
take a normal, happy, healthy kid and make them want to do that. There's clearly going to be many other factors involved, whether it be um, something you're born with genetically that's an issue with you, something that's situational. You mentioned childhood traumas, and I think we're starting as a society in general to wake up to the fact that what happens to little children, we carry our whole lives with us, and it's very difficult to let that down.
Yeah, I mean, I use the metaphor, I've used this in other interviews, that we absolutely have compassion for the child that is abused as a child, that is abused physically, sexually, emotionally, or is neglected severely and chronically. We have compassion for that child when they're due to physical abuse, uh, they're exposed to traumatic brain injury or constant concussions. And we have compassion that, you know, the one person they think that they can lean on or trust in the family is then a person that's not to be trusted, and then exposes them to inappropriate levels of sexual content before they're developmentally able to understand it. And then, we can even maybe be a little flexible with a teenager that falls into the wrong crowd and begins experimenting with criminal behaviors. But then we have no sympathy at all when that person becomes Richard Ramirez, right? Because all of those things happen to Richard Ramirez to get him there. Did he ever have the three-legged stool that Dr. Shiloh talks about, of the brain structure, the chemical? He certainly had the adverse childhood experiences that would have been the match to that flame, but, we don't know. It's just different in so many ways. I've met so many kids that play the most ultra violent, gory video games, and they know it's a game, and it's very, very clear. Like there's no, and they understand it from a very, very early age. I really think that in so many of these mass shootings, and this is supported um, by research, is it's about involvement of the caregivers. Like how involved is the caregiver or caregivers in that particular perpetrator's life? That seems to have a big overlay that is statistically validated in what we know about these big mass events. And and then again, you have to look at it as well. We live in a culture and an economy that requires parents, like it's just we don't have like that post World War II economy anymore where one parent can raise, can support a spouse and two kids and own a car and a house and go on a really great vacation at least once a year. That is gone, right? So we live in a world now that requires like parents to be burning the tires, going all the time, 24 hours a day. So how do you find space to even recognize that your child may be having some difficulties and monitor that? But again, I want to kind of go back to that point I spoke about earlier, is that resiliency is built into us. But we as law enforcement or psychologists that work in this milieu, we see the worst of the worst. And that's what we're here to do, is to dive down deep and pull these things apart about why, how this happened, in what way. And but even you started off with talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. When you look at Jeffrey Dahmer, here's somebody that definitely had that brain structure issue. Like he was fascinated with the internal structure of animals. It's like, was he torturing them, or was he, like in many ways we see in psychopaths, like he's just interested in how it works? Why is he interested in how it works? Because he doesn't really see it as a living thing, or he doesn't understand that this is a living creature the way that you or I would understand living creatures. And rarely does he see adults in that way, right? But then what was the match? The match was he got abandoned as a teenager, right? Just got abandoned. His family, just his parents divorced, they upped and moved away. The affluenza teen, right? That was a huge case in Texas. Like, I don't know if we would necessarily call it neglect, but it was just this bizarre, uh, inconsistent and non-consistent parenting, and then leaving this kid on his own to do whatever he wanted. So there are some things that are built into various cultures around the world about parental responsibility and community responsibility in raising our children. And sometimes that just gets really hard, and parents fuck up, and sometimes they're great and do the best they possibly can, and these things still happen. So it's interesting. It's an equation that's ever evolving and ever changing, depending on the individual and the environment, their brain structure, and the community around them.
Well, Tom and I are sitting here trying to take in everything that you two are saying. You're both so generous with your time and what you know to share with us and our audience. This is fascinating stuff. I would recommend anyone who wants to learn more about this. If you deal with people in any profession, you need to understand people. And if you're in the law enforcement profession, criminal justice, anywhere in it, you have to understand the criminal mind, because it really isn't that different than our minds. Because I think at any time, any one of us can get driven to a thing like murder if the circumstances are right. I've asked many people, "Do you think you could ever kill somebody?" No, no. Well, there's a person with a knife about to stab your little child. You watch a mother act then, right? It's all about the moment, the motivation, whatever it is. So I want to thank the both of you. First of all, we could probably spend 6 hours picking your brains for everything that you guys know, and still not scratch the surface. But I just want to thank you, Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. You are amazing people, and we are thrilled to call you friends now. And if you saw any behaviors on my or Tom's part
I
that
was
are
writing them down.
concerning,
Yeah.
maybe we could talk about that
Taking notes.
offline, because I don't want the audience. Thank you. We know
We're,
that.
we're sending this to the
You're
FBI
our
right
kind of
Yeah,
now.
mess, and we
we're a
love it.
mess and we know
So
it. That's okay.
great
We
match. Thank
embrace
you
it.
guys
It's
so
all
much. We
good.
really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Great opportunity. Thank you. And so what a great show. Thank you.
thank you. It's great because our guests are great, and that's you guys. LA Not So Confidential is the podcast. Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Listen in, learn, be educated and amused at the same time. It's a wonderful show. We thank you so much for being our guest today. And as usual, I want to thank my partner, Tom Smith. Tom, take us out as you always do, brother.
Well, thank you, and my part, Shiloh and Scott. Thank you so much. We were really looking forward to this, and it is so interesting. I mean, it's so interesting. I can't even pronounce or spell half the names you were throwing in. I mean, I'm just sitting here like, all right, this is way above my pay grade. But it's the most fascinating thing in the world, and you guys come across and explain it so great. Thank you so much. And again, for everyone out there, LA check their show out. These two individuals, everyone out there in the podcast world, were on the cover of Podcast Magazine.
That's
That
right.
says a little bit, okay?
A lot, it says. Yeah.
Right. Dan and I
A
are
lot.
trying like hell to get to that spot, and what a better duo role model for us to try to achieve that level than you two. So thank you so much for being here. And we're going to see you again soon. But we'll more to come on that. We're going to keep that a little secret, but that's coming up. But like we always do, everybody pray for, say a prayer for law enforcement officers out there, the member of the military. They do a thankless job, not for money, not for pay, not for medals, but just because they love what they do in their communities and for their country. And for the other part of it, with the what Scott and Shiloh do, pray for them also because that's a tough job. That is not easy. It's not sitting behind a desk taking notes and coming up with a profile. It's getting in the weeds, getting out there with the cops and understanding what is out there. So thank you for them and pray for everyone out there. And for my partner, Dan Murphy, Shiloh and Scott, once again, youtube.com/@goldshields, rumble.com/goldshields. Hit that subscribe button. It's free. Hit the bell so you get notified of all our new episodes that are coming up with great guests like we just had. So thank you again, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see everybody soon.